Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion Summit. Brought to you by ACM SIGGRAPH. My name is Alex Bryant, and I am part of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I have the greatest pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. But first, some housekeeping rules. This live stream is moderated by ACM SIGGRAPH. We ask all comments to stay respectful of others and respect ACM's policy against harassment. This means to exercise consideration and respect in your speech and actions. Refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior and speech, and to be mindful of your fellow participants. No intimidating, harassing, abusive, discriminatory, derogatory, or demeaning speech or actions of any participant will be tolerated. So, for over 30 years, South African native, best-selling children's author, illustrator, TV personality, and motivational speaker, Trevor Romain has dedicated his life and career to empower kids to become happier, healthier, and more confident. Find his award-winning animated series, his books, and educational materials, podcasts, and more on his website, trevorromain.com. The title for today's session is The Importance of Inclusivity. Now that's comical sense. Please help me introduce Trevor Romain.
Thank you very much, Alex. Much appreciated. Excuse me. I'm very excited to be here live today from Kauai, Hawaii. So it's all set for a conversation that I think is going to be enlightening and also very important. I was born at a very young age, so I don't remember much about it. What I do remember as a little boy growing up in South Africa was my little friend Dan. You see, my grandfather had a farm, and on the farm there was a worker, a foreman, and the foreman on the farm had a young son who was about my age, Dan. He was 7, and he was black, I was white. Dan's dad lived in a hut. When I visited, was in the farmhouse with my grandparents. We were in separate worlds in South Africa at that time. We lived different lives. There was a bubble that I was living in. But when I was on the farm and my parents just let me play with this little boy, we had the most amazing time. We played cars together in the sand. We ran around chasing cows. We hid in the cornfields. And then at home time, Dan went back to the hut and I went back to the farmhouse, the nice farmhouse. We continued to be friends until I was about 10 or 11 years old. And unfortunately, shortly after that, my grandfather passed away and I didn't go back to the farm. The farm was sold. When I became a teenager, politics was not happening because of my prefrontal cortex. All I was thinking about was girls. That were my teenage years in South Africa. Like any teen in any country, all I was thinking about was the love of one's life, or acquiring thereof, or being interested in. Interesting thing is that when I was a little boy, my parents never said anything derogatory about Dan. There was a general feeling in the bubble that I lived in that it was separate, but I wasn't born with any hatred. No children are born with hatred. So Dan and I were good friends, and I'm very happy that because of Skype, Zoom, even the telephone, I was able to get in touch with Dan recently, and we had a great conversation about this. And I'm hoping that he and I could maybe write a book about how we grew from that. Everything changed for me, though, when I went to the army. When I was in South Africa, we all had to do 2 years military training. I did my training and one day found myself in a hospital going to visit a friend of mine. I took a shortcut and found myself in the children's part of the hospital. It was really, really dismaying. Lots of kids, many of them were injured. There happened to have been some incident at the border of South Africa, Southwest Africa and Angola at that time, and some of the children had been injured. I'm walking through this hospital, minding my own business, feeling pretty important. I'm a soldier, going to visit my friend who happened to be in the hospital, and I accidentally walked into the children's ward trying to cut through to visit my friend. Well, it was terrible. I felt awful for those kids. I felt uncomfortable. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. So I tried to scoot across, get away, but I walked past a bed that had 3 or 4 kids on it. And these kids were bandaged and looking sick and very uncomfortable. But as I walked past one of the beds, a little boy put up his hands and he said to me, "Hou my vas asseblief," which means, "Please, can you hold me?" And I stopped and I looked down at this little boy and my heart sank, because as I was looking at him, I realized his legs had been very badly injured. I didn't know what to do. Obviously, this little boy was in distress. So I looked around the room, tried to see if I could find a doctor or a nurse. There was nobody was there at that time. There were no grown-ups in the room. So I looked down at the little boy again, and he reaches even further, and he says to me, "Asseblief meneer, hou my vas. Please, sir, can you pick me up and hold me?" And something happened in my heart at that moment, which changed my life completely. Now, I wasn't aware that my life had changed, but it certainly had. I did what I had to do. I put down my backpack, I bent down and I picked up that little boy, and he put his arms around me. And I can tell you, I have never been held so tightly in my life. That little boy held on for dear life, and he buried his little face right here in my neck, and he started to cry. And that little boy's tears ran down my cheek, down my neck and into my shirt, and touched my heart. And an incredible seed was sown. A seed that crossed me beyond just being a white person in South Africa. This was a black boy who changed my life and set up my career and who I am today. I never forgot that little boy. I often hear his little voice in the back of my head. And as I started taking down notes about how I was feeling while I was in the army, because I wanted to be a writer from when I was a very young person, I started creating little stories, because I would go back to those hospital rooms and chat to those kids and make up stories and make them laugh. So I started writing very simple stories to try and connect with kids who may not speak my language and who may not be in the same culture as me. And a lot of it was based around kindness. One of the ways I got across barriers was I used little animals in my animations and in my stories, because that was a way to include and cover a spectrum of different cultures, different races, different colors. I'll give you an example of one of the little animations that's actually a little series I have been doing called Kindness Is. And we're going to watch that right now. Or maybe not, because technology, no matter how much you practice and prepare, when you see those 2 little dots and a blank screen, that's when I know I will continue. And when the little note comes up at the end that says, "Okay, you can do it now," that's when I will do it. So what I did was create these stories, wrote books, and then one day I wrote a book called The Keeper of the Dreams. Now, this was a story about a little girl who was having nightmares. And she went to her grandfather and asked her grandfather if he could please help her with her nightmares. Well, he said, you've got to go visit the keeper of the dreams. And he told her how to do it in her sleep. And the little girl visits the keeper of the dreams. But when she gets there, she realizes that the keeper of the dreams is sick and the boogeyman has taken over. And he's giving all the wrong dreams to the wrong kids. So she has to go and face the boogeyman to get her dreams back. And that was the story. And I was very excited about it. I had one very small book published, which nobody had even seen. And so I decided to see if I could get this book published. I illustrated it as well, and I sent it off to publishers. Nobody responded. A few rejections came a while later, and being a person who was not known and a youngster, I got no response, especially in the way that I wanted. So I decided, okay, I'm going to see if I can get this book published anyway, because I would like to have a book. Because as an author, you need a book, and you need the kind of book that I wanted to do. Full color illustrations, hardback. So I went around to charities around Austin, Texas, where I now live. And I started asking people if they would like this book for charity, and if they would give the book away, get paid for it, and we would raise the money for charity. Well, I went to a number of charities, and people looked at me like I was crazy. They said, what's the catch? I said, it's nothing. You have the book, you raise the money. I don't want anything. Just that's my way of giving back. Well, nobody wanted it, except for one organization called the Candlelighters Childhood Cancer Foundation, now known as the American Childhood Cancer Organization. I'm proud to have sat on the board and even been board president of that organization. So the Candlelighters said, yes, we are going to do this. Definitely, we want to do this book. And so we printed the book, it was bound and it was published, and we made a nice sum of money. And I was very excited about it because I'd helped a charity, plus I had a book. Well, a few weeks later, the organizer of the charity said to me, listen, I'm arranging a book signing for you with the kids at the hospital, so the cancer kids, so you can go and sign books for them. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. I can't do that. And she said, why? I said, I don't think I can go into a hospital and see little kids with cancer. It's going to break my heart. I don't think I can do it. She said, yes, you can. I said, no, seriously, I've never met a child with cancer. I don't know how I wouldn't know what to do. I don't think I can do it. She said, you will be doing it next Tuesday, 2:00, Brackenridge Hospital, Austin, Texas. I said, okay. The next week came. I was nervous. I decided, okay, I'm going to go in there, read the story, get out as quickly as possible, carry on with my life. And so I did. Went to the hospital, walked in the room, and there were about 14 kids aged, 16 to 3, with their IV poles, bald from the chemotherapy, and they're all standing there, and my stomach is turning. And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to interact with somebody who is that different from me, somebody who was living in a different world to mine and looking at life through a different lens to mine. I was petrified. So I sat down, decided I was going to read the book, sign them, and get out. So I read the book, and after the reading, a little girl puts up her hand and she says, excuse me, can you read it again? I said, okay. So I read the book 7 times that day. And then afterwards, we sat and we chatted and we had a 2-hour conversation. And I realized that through visuals and through storytelling, that I connected with these kids. It was unbelievable. When I got to the door to leave, as I was saying goodbye, a little boy put up his hand, Alex Dunn. And Alex said, are you coming back tomorrow? And I said, yes. And I've been going back and working with children in hospitals and all over the world, refugee camps, orphanages, for 30 years, all because something connected me to those kids, and that was using visuals and using humor. Now, the title of this talk, well, you know these marketing dudes, they figure out all the titles, it's, diversity, inclusion, that's comical sense. Well, comical sense is the style of delivery that I use to help me get through sometimes very, very, very tight barriers to be able to connect with kids and with adults. I realized that stories help me to open doors. And that book and subsequent visits with kids led me to create a series of self-help books for kids. Things like how to do homework without throwing up. If you don't take care of your body, where else are you going to live? Bullies are a pain in the brain. Working with those books and adding humor was a breakthrough for me. It really helped me to connect with kids in a different way. I'll give an example of the types of animations that came out of that book series where I tried to include, and this was, goodness me, 16 years ago that the series started being developed and subsequently ran on PBS. But most of the roles for kids at that time was just white kids who pretty much were right in the middle, not too rich, not too poor, in the middle, white kids. So I decided I was going to throw it all in and create a series that included everybody. And if we are lucky enough to be able to get a little montage to work, I will give you an example of the characters from our Comical Sense TV series.
Other people think. I like who I am, no matter what I look like. To be yourself, you have to know and like yourself. Me and the other kids all teased her a lot and called her Stinky Pinky. I just want to apologize for all the mean stuff I did to you, especially for all the times I switched your tuna with cat food.
The Wi-Fi's Club is going to the convention tomorrow. You should come along. No worries, mate. I'll see you for spring break, right?
I got you a little going away thing.
What?
It's a survival box. You fill it in with all kinds of stuff like pictures, CDs, an address book, stationery, toothbrush. We'll still be best buds. Don't worry about that.
It's so much better when everyone is nice to each other. One of a kind. I like that.
My first order of business is going to be to implement a zero-tolerance bully policy.
Love the way those dudes sneak in the titles and the branding in there. That's why they are doing it. So that TV series and connecting with those kids was really eye-opening for me, because one of the things that I did in the show was even have a child who had a slight sibilance when they were speaking, because not everybody is able to speak very, very clearly because of who they are and what's happened in their lives, and some people stutter. And so I included that in the series as well. And our main character, Sky, is Native American, and so we had a whole sort of an inclusive cast of characters in there. That opened a very interesting door to me. I was invited to go to the Congo, Uganda, Burundi, and Rwanda shortly after the series was running. And I jumped at the opportunity. I was asked if I would join a contingency from the United Nations and UNICEF to go to those countries in Africa and work with former child soldiers and refugees, kids in camps. And I I jumped at the chance, because one of the sayings I live by is nothing can grow in your comfort zone. And I realized when I was with the kids with cancer that stepping out of that comfort zone was life-changing. So when this opportunity arose, I said, yes, I am all for it. And, you know, I found something in my journal that I'm going to read to you, because I am dyslexic. I struggle with ADD and have done that my whole life. So anytime I want to remember something, I do it as a note or even a visual in my journal. And in fact, I can just give you a little look of what a person with ADD's journal looks like. It's just got a lot of stuff that happens in the journal. Just flip through and show you things that I want to remember. So I found a note which relates to my trip to the Congo, because I was going to the Congo with this lens of life, which this person in the piece I'm going to read to you reflected. And this is what she says. It's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie said, she shares her experience of coming to the US from Nigeria to attend college and discovering that Americans had only one story of Africa, that of poverty, famine, war, and tragedy. They couldn't understand her story of a teenage life filled with modern conveniences and pop music. She says, show a people one thing, as only one thing, over and over and over again, and that is what they become. The people who do the showing in our society are the people who have power. The richest media outlets, corporations, and politicians have the loudest voices and become our dominant narrators. These narrators tend to give only characters who most resemble them. They give them their due depth and dignity. Most others are ignored or simplified for easy consumption, and that is how we often look through a different lens. When I created Comical Sense, I created characters who wouldn't generally be cast in heroes' roles and made them heroes. Weaving in more diverse examples is not only inclusive, it also helps students understand and explore issues from perspectives that may be different from their own. In this approach, diversity is not a list of boxes to check off. It fills a much deeper role. The richness of experience adds to a more robust understanding of the topics and concepts. And to get a better understanding, that's why I decided to go to the Congo, Uganda, Burundi, and take on this trip. I was petrified. I'm a little bit of a fraidy cat sometimes when it comes to stepping into that comfort zone, like most people are. And after they told me I needed a myriad of injections and malaria tablets and what have you, I thought, well, what am I doing? But I'm so glad I did, because that experience I have now shared with pretty much almost 1 million children in the world, the next couple of stories I'm going to share with you. And this is how stepping out of that zone and being in somebody else's space is going to help us to learn about diversity and inclusion. And so this is what happened. We fly into the Congo. We land at the airport, and I'm very excited. We get shipped off to this big hangar where the United Nations is briefing people. So we're in there, and this guy stands up and he's like, okay, everybody, I'm going to give you now the informations, because when you are going to go through our United Nations trips, you are going to have a driver. He will drive you around everywhere. He will have your papers. He will take care of you. Now, if somebody stops you, you just give him the papers and you shut up. Somebody says, excuse me? What do you mean if somebody stops you? He says, no, it's not a problem. Sometimes they make a roadblock and they stop you And sometimes we just have to give them a little bit of money, then it's okay. So guy says, what do you mean stop you? He says, no, they kidnap you, but just don't worry, just for sometimes just one day, or sometimes even 5 minutes. But don't worry, we can sort it all out. We just give them and they come back. And now I'm getting like nervous. And I put up my hand. I said, excuse me, how often does this happen? He goes, no, don't worry. 1, 2, 3 times a week. Don't worry, we've got it sorted out. So I was like, oh, okay. But your driver, he knows what to do. He's got the papers. So we get assigned our drivers. I'm pretty enthusiastic. I've got a guy who is really knowledgeable. Great guy. He's explaining to me as we're driving through all the areas, and he's explaining to me where everybody lives. And we're heading to a refugee camp at the end of the road. Actually, this was in Bujumbura in Burundi. And we're heading along the road. We visited all those countries. And he's talking and he's chatting and he's taking me to the refugee camp, to the orphanage, because I was going to go and do some art lessons and story sharing, even though we were having 3 different languages that we had to have interpreters for, but it was a great challenge. As we come over a hill, all of a sudden, we notice there's a boom across the road and a sentry box. And there are 2 soldiers. They were big guys. I mean, they had huge arms, bullet belts, berets, sunglasses. They looked like Rambos. These 2 dudes obviously had seen the movie Rambo and were really looking the part. One guy had a couple of hand grenades. One guy had a green bazooka. Oh my goodness. So we stop and I look over at the driver and he's now silent. He's gripping the steering wheel. No words are coming out of his mouth. I'm looking at him thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? One guy walks over and he looks in the window and he says to me, where are you going? I said, sir, I'm going to the Don Bosco orphanage. What are you going to do there? So I'm going to work with the children. What to work with the children? So where are your papers? I get the papers and I give them to him. He looks at the papers. He goes, hold on. He disappears and he goes back to where the other guy is by the sentry post, and they start having an argument. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is not good. They are arguing and yelling at each other. The guy comes back and he looks in the window and he goes, where are you going? I said, sir, I'm going to the Don Bosco orphanage. He goes, what are you going to do there? I said, sir, I'm going to work with kids. Here, let me show you. This is my journal. I do little drawings in my journal. See, just little drawings like this. And he says, you give that to me. Okay, I hand him over the journal. He starts looking through my journal. He gets to a page and he says, you draw this? I said, yes, sir. He says, you can draw me? I'm like, okay. So he stands back. I tear a piece of paper out of my journal. He salutes, and I draw a little sketch of him saluting. I give it to him. He looks at it, he goes, you are a cartoon man. Can you draw my friend? I said, sure. So he calls the guy over. Yeah, the guy comes over. He's got a rocket launcher, bullet belts, and he comes and he speaks to the guy in his language, and he says he's going to draw your picture. And the guy stands, he salutes. And I said, can you stand back a little bit? That rocket launcher was rusty. I was like, this doesn't look like a safe thing. So I drew his picture, and he takes the picture from me, and they're both very excited. They open the boom, and off we go. As we're driving, I look over to the driver, and he goes, I think I know those guys. I'm like, what? You know those guys? Oh, my goodness me. This is why don't you tell me? He goes, no, sometimes it's better not to say anything. And so we go about our business and got to the end of the road where this orphanage was, which I will share with you in a second. But every day we were driving along the road, and as we moved along the road, we would come over the hill, and I would expect to see my friends there, but that sentry post and the boom had moved. We go down the road, 3 miles down the road, there they are again, setting up at another place. We pull up. This is the next day. Guy walks around. He looks in the window. He goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to the Don Bosco." "Oh, it's the cartoon man. Open the bloody gate." Guy opened the boom and we went through every day. That was amazing to me because I was told I wasn't talented enough to take art as an elective at school. I didn't draw for many, many years in my late 20s and early mid-20s, late teens. So one day I hoped to tell the art teacher who told me I wasn't good enough to draw and excluded me because I didn't fit in any way at school, being a dyslexic kid in special ed, what have you, that so my drawings actually helped me one day get out of serious trouble. We get to the end of the road where the orphanage was, and that changed my life completely. Total life changer, because there were about 1,000 kids at that orphanage. They were former child soldiers, very poor, lived in dormitories, and I was invited to give an art lesson to a group of about 30 kids in a classroom. Now, I was very excited. This white dude was going to go to Central Africa, and I was going to change the world. I was going to make a difference for kids. I had my pencils, I had paper, I had crayons. This was going to be outstanding. I walked into the classroom and I backpedaled and wanted to run out of there immediately, because sitting in that classroom were about 30 kids on the floor, little chalk tablets, dirt floor, smashed out windows, and I felt like I was a fraud instantly, because those children have been through more in their little lives than I will go through in 10 lives. And I felt like an imposter. I had come there. I was going to take my little ideas and this incredible brain that I have, and I was so important. Everybody was going to love me. I felt terrible. I really felt nauseous to my stomach, and I wanted to run out of there. I felt like an imposter. And indeed I was, really, because who was I to go into that arena and tell them how to live their lives? I decided I was not going to do it. I was going to leave. So I smiled and said to the translator, "Listen, I don't think I can do this. I don't feel well." And he goes, "No, you have to do this." So I thought, okay, I would go in really quickly, do a drawing on the chalkboard, because then I wouldn't have to say anything. They would then just look at the drawing, and people like to watch other people drawing. It opens a lot of doors, and it has for me. So I get up to the board and I draw a little drawing, and I turn and look over my shoulder, and nothing. These kids are sitting and staring at me. So I'm in a panic now. I give them all a piece of paper and I ask them to please draw something. Zero. No response. Their eyes were vacant. Those kids, many of them former child soldiers, had just been through the most traumatic time. And I'm smiling and giving them a piece of paper and telling them to draw their feelings. That went down like a lead balloon. No response. So now I'm panicking, and I really, really want to get out of there fast as possible. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So then I said, okay, guys, just draw anything. Draw something for me. No response. So now I'm going through my mental Rolodex. Now, a Rolodex is something that many of you won't know about because you are a little young. But anyway, never mind. So I went through my head and thought, how can I connect with these kids? How can I connect with them? And then a little thought popped into my head. My goodness, most of those children had lost their parents. They were orphans. My dad had died a number of years before, and that was the connection. So I said, guys, I think I may know what some of you are going through. Let me explain. So I drew a picture of my dad and I held it up, and they still looked at me blankly. And I said, this is my daddy, and he died. Now, when my father died, I suppressed my grief so much because I was sort of looking to help my mom and my siblings. So I I just didn't deal with my dad's death. I pushed that pain down. Anytime it came up, I popped the pain down. So I looked at this picture of my dad, and all these kids are just looking at me, and I said, this is my daddy. And he died. And as I said that, I heard this very weird noise. It was like a howl. I looked around, I wasn't sure what it is, and then I realized that the noise was coming from me. My grief came out. Oh my goodness, I started to cry. I cried so hard. I was sobbing. All that grief that was just tamped down just came out. Obviously because of the situation, because of them, because of being empathetic, because of shame that I was feeling about being in a place that I shouldn't be, being a fraud. Oh my goodness me, that all came out and I collapsed. I curled up in a ball and I was crying. I feel this little hand on my shoulder and I look up and one of the kids says to me, it's going to be okay, it's okay. Oh my goodness, that made me cry even more. My head is down, and while my head is down, I hear this strange noise. It's I kind of look up and I see these kids are doing little drawings. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to put my head down. So I put my head down again, let them draw. And then I started thinking about the kids with cancer that I've worked with over the years. I've seen 47 kids. Around 47 kids through end of life. I've been there, and that all came flooding to me and all the kids. Now I am inconsolable. Big word for a dyslexic. I am crying. And so I look up and I say, and you know what? And these kids look at me like this with big eyes. Translators, we're trying to do it in different languages. I say, I work with kids who have cancer, and this reminds me of them, and I'm so sad. And put down my head and I hear, excuse me? And I look up and one of the boys says, what's a kid with cancer? I said, oh, let me tell you. So I explained what cancer was. These kids had never heard the word cancer before. How would they? They're in a jungle situation, they're in a refugee camp. They don't even have a clinic there. So I explained that there was a sickness, these kids were in the hospital, and then I told them about the mischievous things I had done with the little kids. Oh my goodness. One of them was, there was a little boy I knew who once poured apple juice into his urine sample container. And when the nurse came along, he gave it to her. And then he said, look, it all looks milky. She takes a look at it. She says it is. He pops open the lid and says, well, I better pass it through again. And he drinks it. She said, you're drinking pee. Anyway, those kids loved that story. I must have told that story 100 times that week. And what happened was, though, when I shared my grief and I genuinely connected with them on a level that they understood, that broke down those diversity barriers. What that did was that included me in their world because there was a genuine connection, an empathetic connection that wasn't fabricated, which is what I had tried to achieve when I first walked in there. And that week we had a great time. On the last day, they asked me when I walked in the classroom again, I was there for a week, they wanted another story. And I said, no, I want to ask you guys something. What do you guys like most in the whole world? And they went crazy. They started screaming, sir, we like ice cream. Well, they had tasted ice cream the week before for the very first time in their lives. UNICEF had made ice cream, and oh my goodness. So we drew pictures of ice cream and we had descriptions of what it tastes like, which was really fun to hear someone describe something that they don't know much about, but loved the taste. And then it was time for me to go. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. When I arrived there, I wanted to run away. Now I wanted to stay. I wanted to phone up my wife and say, hey, you know what? I'm bringing 30 kids home. We forgot to have kids, my wife and I. And so I was now going to have 30. But at the gate of the orphanage, which is often what kids do in Africa, is do a dance to be able to say goodbye and thank you. And they gathered at the gate, they did a dance, we got into the vehicle, the UN vehicle, and we were just about to drive away. And as we accelerated, one of the kids broke away from the group and started running next to the car. He was banging on the side of the car, screaming, "Stop, stop, stop." And I told the driver, "Stop." And he put on brakes, and I wound down the window, and all the dust was coming in. And I looked out and I said, "What's wrong?" And the little boy thrust this bag into the window. I said, "What is it?" He said, open the bag." So I opened the bag, and inside is a coin. It is a Queen Victoria coin from 1890. It's beautiful. It's a medallion. It's very, very heavy. And it was obviously this little boy's greatest treasure. So I said, "Oh, thank you. This is very nice. That's beautiful." And I handed it back to him. "Thank you for showing me." He goes, No, mister, you must keep it." I said, "No, I can't keep this. Who knows where that little boy might have got this coin from? It could have been passed down. He could have found it, but it was a treasure, and I didn't want to take this from him." And I said, No. And I tried to give it back. He said, "No, please, mister, take it. And when you get home and you see those kids, the sick kids in the hospital, please to use that to buy ice cream for the kids in the hospital." And you know what? I did. I bought lots of ice cream. But I've kept this coin because on my trips around the world, I've done many, many, many school assemblies. Goodness me, in the last 10 years, over 1,200 school assemblies. And I share that story and this coin because I want kids to look at the world through a different lens, through a lens that is going to connect with them. I had the privilege of meeting Nelson Mandela, and he said something that I'll never forget, that when a person dies, their library of stories dies with them. So keeping a story alive that might change other people's lives or inspire them is what I've done with my work. I'm going to continue to help kids be more empathetic and accepting. And there's an example of how I've taken those experiences and created little animations to be able, in a short time, with very little said, get across some really important messages. And I would like to show you, before I end today, with a clip of my journal, which we have brought to life. A story I often share with military children took place in an orphanage in South Africa while I was visiting. The kids there have nothing. No TV, no video games, not much food. That day, somebody had donated cookies, and each child got one. They waited patiently in a long line. They only get cookies twice a year. Not surprisingly, they ate them as soon as they got them in their hands. Except for one little boy. I'll never forget. He was wearing an orange hoodie. He took his cookie and he ate it exactly in half. I mean, he nibbled the edges to make the half perfect. Then he did something amazing. He reached into his pocket and he took out some white school paper with blue lines. He wrapped the cookie into the paper. He took his time making sure the edges were folded perfectly. Then he carefully put it into his pocket. I went up to him afterwards and said, "Didn't you like the cookie?" "I did, sir," he said. "It was the best cookie I've ever tasted." "I know what you're going to do," I said. "You're saving that half for yourself for tomorrow because nobody will have one." "No, sir," he said. "My friend is in the hospital. He's very sick and he missed cookie day today. I think he's coming back next week, and so I'm saving half the cookie for him." was the cookie story, and another life-changing experience. And I believe our duty, based on Nelson Mandela's quote, is to share our stories and to listen to other people's stories so that we can connect with them and certainly break through the barriers that are separating people, mainly because we buy into the stories that we hear over and over again, especially about other people, especially about other races. And to be able to listen to our own story and listen to the stories of real people, not marketing stories, even though I understand that we're in the business of marketing. But when we need to make breakthroughs, especially now in the world, empathy is something that I truly believe is vitally important. I wanted to thank you so much for this opportunity of sharing these stories with you. That is my mission. And when one gets to do that, luckily now, thanks to technology, because obviously we would have all loved to have been together in the same room. And I hope one day in the future that we can do this live and we can look back and say, wow, that was a terrible time in history. That virus did so much damage, yet it's creating doors and it's creating windows for us to walk through and look through and reach out through. So thank you so much. I believe we are going to have time for questions, and this is going to be interesting to figure out how we are going to look over to the side, see what the question is, and I'll be happy to answer them. And there's very serious Alex, who is going to help me with the questions so we can see them. I can't hear you. Unmute. Well, if you speak, I'll do the words. I mean, if you just move your mouth. No, I cannot hear you now, but I can lip read you saying, can you hear me now? So one of the questions I do often get is, how, you're so lucky. How did you get to have such a blessed life? How did you get these opportunities? I don't think I could ever do that. I haven't had those opportunities. But here's the thing. I didn't think I could do it. And by volunteering, going to the hospital, especially after my first experience, that is what gave me the impetus and personal permission to be able to go places I would have never gone. And going to the Congo, I said, if anybody ever needs somebody to go, I'm ready to go. So for those of you who think they could never do anything like this, the only person who's stopping you is yourself, because as far as you put yourself out, somebody is going to need your services. And especially in this business, you don't necessarily have to be on the ground like I have been. I often work for an orphanage in South Africa, and I do graphics and stuff to be able to get them noticed. So that's how you can get involved. All right, so how did I practice my gift of storytelling? It's one of those interesting things. That's from Tony. Tony, there's a saying that I live by. Little by little, a little becomes a lot. The more I got up and told and shared stories, the better practiced I was, and the easier it was for me to actually relax and sit into a story. Because when I first started, especially being an ADD guy, I thought my audience was getting bored. So I would rush the stories because you don't want anybody listening to you to be bored. What I realized in rushing the stories was that I was robbing them of an opportunity to actually ingest what I was saying at a comfortable pace, so it could sit, especially the painful part of stories or the punchline. So just by doing it, and I started volunteering at a classroom. I went to a classroom and said, hey, I'd love to share a story. And teachers love that. And I would suggest, if you haven't done that already, what a great way to start practicing talking. How am I able to stay so positive in these difficult times? Well, that's a great question. I am the type of person who looks at life and tries to find the the sunrise. And I know that behind the clouds, the sun is still shining. I actually every morning practice just a very short mindfulness meditation. It's not, I don't levitate and I don't go into a full trance. What I do is I'm just mindful of where I am and how lucky I am to be able to do the job I do. And I have found often that when I am allowing myself to be grateful, the positivity comes through. And also, I doing so much work, and I spend a lot of time at the orphanage in South Africa. I go there every year. Every time I start feeling depressed, sorry for myself, sad, I look at pictures I've taken of those little guys and realize, whew, even though we are in a very tough time, I've got it really, really good, because they are struggling, and they are struggling to eat. So the Botshabelo orphanage in South Africa is a place I'm close to, and that helps me to stay positive by just really opening my eyes and maybe sometimes not being so self-important and taking my little own world out of the picture and realizing that there is a big world and we're all in this together. It doesn't matter. This is a balancer. Pain and sadness and sickness, we're all in it together. So we've all got to stay together and be together for each other.
Just a good test. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you, Alex. So type it up, put it up there. Oh, yeah. All right. I think that what he was saying is, what would you say to someone who takes diversity and inclusion for granted, or who doesn't really care about it? Example, companies. You know, that's a very good, very, very good question as well. There are a lot of people who are self-entitled. There are a lot of people who think they know everything. You know what I have found? By standing on a soapbox and telling them how they should feel, never worked, doesn't work for me. I take people like that out of my sphere of influence. I don't need to convince anybody else, because by being the way they are restricting the goodness in their life. And very often these are people who are grumpy, unhappy with life, and angry. So I try to steer clear of them unless it's in a situation which is affecting my life directly. Then I'm just really honest with people and say, look, you know, what you're saying just doesn't sit nicely with me. And I have ended friendships because people have said, something that's racist or something that just doesn't fit with my beliefs. I've decided to not have those people in my life. So I hope that answers your question. In what ways can we get young people to engage in the art of storytelling? What I have found is so often we need to give kids permission. What do we do our whole lives? We tell kids what we think they need to hear instead of listening to what they're asking for. I think we can get them to engage by creating a platform and having them share something that connects with them. So instead of having them tell a story about a dinosaur, if we say to a child or a group of children, wow, when have you been really afraid? What happened? And by asking them to explain something that they have felt, and maybe you have felt too, they love to share what they have experienced and tell the story. And in that way, we can actually have an opportunity to ask them questions. I created these. I was looking to see if I had them, but these connecting cards where I put a lot of cards in this pile, and it says, what was your most fearful moment? If you could change the world, what would you do? What is your superpower? And then to be able to draw a card and have kids speak, they love to share their ideas, but we have to create the platform and a safe place for them to do it. And that's going to be our challenge, but I believe it's very doable. And I've seen it over the years work very, very well. And it boosts somebody's confidence to be able to have an audience, especially somebody who may be marginalized or not fit into this core group. By sharing their feelings, other kids can see, wow, that person feels just like me. They have the same feelings and pain or enthusiasm. Thank you very much. Thanks for the great questions, everyone. I really appreciate you allowing me to stand here and just spew forth all the stuff that's been going on in my life. And I must tell you that the inside of my brain is just like the inside of the journal. So for me to sit down for an hour and actually get out what I wanted to say and not bounce like a ping ball all over the place was an achievement for me. And I'm glad you allowed me to have this experience to be able to share it. So thank you very much. I wish you all a wonderful weekend and better days ahead together. Thank you.